The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Immigration, the opioid crisis, school shootings, police misconduct. The list of challenges facing law enforcement is more complex than ever before.
We tackle these issues and more with San Mateo County's top law enforcement officials, Sheriff Carlos Bolanos and District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe. The game is crime and punishment. The game is on.
I'm Kevin Mullen.
And I'm Mark Simon. Welcome to the game.
San Mateo County is one of the safest counties in California, with crime rates well below the state average. Even with that good news, we are not immune to the concerns we read and hear about almost daily. The fear in minority populations of a crackdown on immigrants, the growing crisis over opioid abuse, the fear our young people face from school shootings, and a seemingly daily report of police abuse of authority.
Here to discuss these complex and difficult issues are the two top law enforcement officials in San Mateo County, Sheriff Carlos Bolanos, just reelected and elected to his office June 5th after 2 years as the appointed sheriff. He's been in law enforcement for 37 years or more, who knows, because he and Steve Wagstaffe, our district attorney who's also here, keep arguing about this. Steve Wagstaffe was reelected to office June 5th without opposition. He was elected in 2010 and has served in the prosecutor's office for over 41 years, not counting his time as a crossing guard in middle school. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you.
We do talk about San Mateo County as a safe county. What is the number one crime problem in San Mateo County? Carlos?
Well, I think the number one type of crime that we have in San Mateo County is property crimes. People breaking into our cars, people breaking into our homes and into our businesses. We're very fortunate that we have a very low violent crime rate in San Mateo County. If you have to choose between the two, I'd rather have my car broken into than be robbed. But that is our biggest crime problem in San Mateo County. By working in partnership with our district attorney's office and the other local law enforcement agencies, we've got a good handle on it. And even our property crimes, which are our biggest problem, are not that great of a problem.
And Steve, is that where most of the prosecutions you pursue are in property crimes?
Yes, that would be the majority of them are in that arena. And because it's our number one crime, it means that we can give attention to it. Some of the bigger counties, they have to give attention to the violent crime. And so these property crimes tend to have less attention in the court system. San Mateo County, that's not the case. We can do it, and we can properly prosecute and sentence people who commit the crimes.
How much is that related to drug use? I mean, how many of the people who are committing property crimes are often doing so because they have a drug-related problem?
You know, I think it's less than it was in decades gone by. Now it's more of a profit motive. What we're seeing is that San Mateo County tends to be a shopping mall for people from some of our surrounding counties. And what we're learning is that they're not down here simply because they're trying to feed a drug habit. They're making money for themselves. They're doing that. We had a case we filed on yesterday where some guy was in the hospital for hypertension, and he stole from a pump, a $5,000 pump from the room that he was in when he walked out. And you sit here and say, well, that wasn't to feed a habit. I don't know where you sell a $5,000 pump on the black market. But that's what we're seeing. It's more just to make money for, other than just simply feeding a drug habit.
I'd like to get both of your opinions on the effect of Proposition 47, which is a proposition from a few years back, passed by the voters, reclassifying certain crimes. There have been mixed results from what I could gather in terms of that impact on property crimes in particular. Where are we in the effect of Prop 47? Is there any relationship there with rise in property crimes? And what have the effects, good and bad, been from Proposition 47? Why don't we start with you, Steve?
Well, let me interject.
Yes.
It reclassified a number of convictions so that they could be served to jail rather than in state prison. Dramatically reducing the amount of time people would serve, even on a sentence, say, of 10 years, they might end up serving 2 years locally. And then the other fear, of course, which we discussed on this show at one point, is you've got all these felons now being released into the community rather than wherever they were in state prison. So with that background.
Two comments I'd make in response, which is number one, you can find statistics to support either side on whether this has played, what level of role it's played in the increase in property crimes, both in our county and counties throughout the state. Nobody can go in and convince somebody on those numbers. So that's a numbers game. Obviously, it's played some role. There just can't be any doubt. Nobody could say it's had no role at all. It has. The other problem that I saw with 47 that we are now seeing and continue to see is that people are not as motivated to go into drug treatment. Sometimes people need that push. They need that kick. They need the arrest by law enforcement, and they need the court system to say, hey, I don't want to go do major time. I don't want to have to do that. I'd rather go into the program. And once they're in the program, they'll embrace it, but they sometimes need that push. We've lost that push. Because on misdemeanors, even though you can get up to a year on many of the misdemeanors, that's not what's being done with misdemeanors. That's not how they're being punished with that type of a concern. So there are people who simply will not go into treatment programs that we want there, because that's what we want them to do. We don't want to put drug users in prison. We want them in the treatment program, but they have to have a fear that provokes them into it. Those are the two big downsides to it. But we've adjusted. As a community, we deal with it. It's our way of life and what we do on that, and we recognize there's a push to try and change it, to make some modifications to it. I don't know if that will go through, but it is overall, we're dealing with it, and at least in our county, we're still making the community safe by aggressive law enforcement and prosecution to make sure that we can hold the people accountable.
And Carlos, you hold a similar view.
I do. The good side about Prop 47 is it allowed us to focus on the violent people in our prisons and to make sure that we prosecute them and keep our families and our community safe. I absolutely support that. The negative side is the folks that would be in the system due to serious drug charges. Those are now misdemeanors. So they're back out in the community. They do have habits to feed, and the way that they feed them is not by working, but by going out and victimizing people's property. And that's where we have seen an effect. We can't have it all. So if we have to choose, I would much rather have us be victims of a higher property crime rate than a violent crime rate. If we look at ourselves compared to some of our surrounding counties, San Mateo County is exceptionally safe, and I absolutely support that.
How has it changed? The sheriff's oversees the jail. You just built a new men's jail. You're building or going to build a new women's jail. How has the jail been different? Because you have people there who historically have gone to state prison and in theory regard jail time as easy time compared to prison.
That's a great question, Mark. So county jails have historically been for drunk drivers, people with suspended licenses. It took me I was struck by the notion that nobody goes straight to state prison. Everybody who's in state prison, the most violent criminal, spent time in county jail. But county jails were not designed for that level of prisoner. Now, in my facilities, 85% of the people in county jail are there for felonies. All the folks that used to be doing time in county jail are now doing their time out of custody. So our county jails are mini prisons. And that has dramatically affected my staff and the way that we have to supervise our correctional facilities.
We're going to take a break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. He's Kevin Mullen. Over here we have Sheriff Carlos Bolanos and District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe when we're talking about crime in San Mateo County. Carlos, the profile of our county is changing and changing dramatically. I read that we have more than 30% of our population is foreign-born. We're in the top 7 counties in the state, behind only LA, San Francisco, and Santa Clara County. We're number 4 in the state. And we can try harder, I know, but how does that change the profile of your jobs, and specifically as it relates to immigration and all the attention and noise that's been directed on it? And I think, to be fair, in some degree, the Latino community expects you to react perhaps somewhat differently to this than somebody else might, because you have, because you are Latino.
Well, thank you. That is a very critical issue in San Mateo County, and especially for our immigrant population, and specifically our Hispanic population. And as I was trying to determine what my position was going to be on immigration enforcement, I set as my guidepost really public safety. So in regards to our interactions with the undocumented population out in the community, it is critical for public safety that everyone feel comfortable interacting and participating in the criminal justice system. So we never ask anyone what their status is in regards to immigration or their documentation status in anything that we do. Where Sheriff's Office is different from police departments is, of course, we run the jails. And in the jails, especially after the passage of Senate Bill 54, California Values Act, we now have guidelines on which inmates we can cooperate with ICE on, and they are serious and violent inmates, and I do cooperate with ICE in regards to those inmates, consistent with SB 54, and the reason that I do that is, again, public safety. These individuals are in our country undocumented, and if ICE does not deal with them, or if we don't deal with them, they go right back to these same communities and victimize them. And for me, it's a public safety issue, and that's how I handle it.
There's a fear, as you know better than I do, in a number of communities. North Fair Oaks is a good example, or any of those places like Home Depot, where you'll see people out waiting for day work, that ICE is just going to swoop in and start scooping people up. Is that something you would basically not cooperate with?
We do not participate in any immigration enforcement that occurs at the street level. That is a federal responsibility, and in fact, Senate Bill 54 forbids us from participating in that. But it has been a long-standing practice in the Sheriff's Office that we do not participate in that type of immigration enforcement. It will cause people to not participate in the criminal justice system. They won't report crimes that they are victims of. They won't be witnesses to crimes that we may be victims of. And I believe that makes all of us less safe.
Steve, on the other hand, the law of the land is you have to be here legally. And a hardliner could argue we've turned a blind eye to a lot of people who are here who, quote unquote, are not here legally. What's your view on this whole issue, and how does the prosecution's office get involved in this issue?
Pretty much in what we're doing with witnesses and victims, as well as defendants. We're required by law. It's an interesting, because of prosecutors, we always want to be, you know what, we're colorblind. It doesn't matter who the person is, everybody gets treated the same. But both by our policy and by the law of the land, the United States Supreme Court, we must consider in every time with the plea bargain somebody's immigration status and what this impact will have on them. And we do. So we have people who may commit small crimes but could cause them deportation. We'll take that into account in deciding how do we want to resolve this case? What will we let them plea to, type of a thing. My bigger concern is exactly what the sheriff just mentioned, and that's a major one, is that people do not feel reluctant to come forward and be as victims or witnesses. We don't want them to fear that I can't come forward. They're just prime targets for these predators, and that's why we want to, because we can do things. We can get U visas for people who are witnesses for us that allows them to stay in the country legally, and we do that hundreds of times every year. But most people don't know that, and that's one of the things that we hope they do, is to where we will consider it as prosecutors.
I want to ask you both about trends you're seeing in terms of crimes. We hear a lot about cybercrime and internet driven crimes. We have an aging population in San Mateo County. I think the most aging county population that's on average getting older. And I understand that seniors can be targeted by certain scams and those kinds of things. What trends are you seeing? Are they internet driven? A lot of stuff online that's moving out there, a lot of fraud issues. What are you seeing in terms of what are emerging crimes in our county?
It's exactly, that is one. As a matter of fact, the Board of Supervisors in our county have recognized that. They have given to me in the budget, starting on the 1st of July, I have a prosecutor and an investigator that will be solely focused on cybercrime, computer crime, and a big part of it is what's going on with elders. Although elders, still the biggest way that they're getting affected, it's still on the telephone or people in person, as it has been for years. We're still getting all the IRS scams, the various jurors. We even had a juror scam last year where people are calling up, you missed jury duty. If you don't pay a fine right now, you will be suffering. And what we know is that elders are more subject to this. It's just a fact of life. They've studied it. They're more trusting. You know, Johnny, their grandson, calling up, the people are very adept. That's still the biggest way that we're encountering it now. But I think we're also beginning to see a lot of more of the cyber method in doing it.
Carlos, what are you seeing?
Exactly what Steve said. It's still targeting our elderly population. The IRS scam continues to be out there.
And for the record, the IRS doesn't call you. They send you letters.
The IRS will never call you.
Yeah.
They've never called me. And not that they would ever have reason to. Let me be very clear about that. That's the number one scam. Number two is there's a warrant for your arrest, and they want you to go to Target and get some gift cards that, and unfortunately, the elderly population can be very trusting, and they fall victim to that. And then the third one is little Johnny, my nephew, is in custody and needs to be bailed out, or he's had a tragic accident, and so many grandparents immediately send the money, of course, only to find out later that it's a scam.
I want to tackle a subject. We're coming up on a break, so we'll have to come back to it in more detail later. But it seems like every day we turn on the TV and there's some example of police beating somebody up or losing control or shooting somebody. Carlos, are you worried about it? Are you worried about it from 2 points of view? One is about your own police force, but also what it does to the reputation of police in the community.
I am. And in San Mateo County, we're very fortunate that we enjoy an excellent relationship with the community that we serve. Many of these issues, as prevalent as they are not in San Mateo County. They're all either in other states or other parts of this state. We work very hard to ensure that we have that level of trust with our community and that level of engagement that we won't have any of those issues. Now, shootings can occur, uses of force occur very regularly, but we hold ourselves to a very high standard, and we hold our people to a very high standard.
Do the deputy sheriffs, are they required to wear body cameras?
We have cameras in all of our correctional facilities, and we are in the process of testing body cameras for our employees. It's a little bit more complex for us because we have so many employees, but also because we have people in the correctional facilities, and we want to make sure that everybody has a camera.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back to this subject in a second. We're visiting with Sheriff Carlos Bolanos and District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon. He's Kevin Mullen. We're joined by San Mateo County Sheriff Carlos Bolanos and District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe. We were talking about police misconduct. From a prosecutorial point of view, Your office, dating back to Keith Sorensen and Jim Fox, your immediate predecessors, had a long history of really being tough on public misconduct by public servants. I would imagine, knowing you as long as I have, this is one of those things that's really like black and white for you. If a police officer abuses his authority, you want to prosecute him as fully as possible.
Very much. Yes, I'm no different than Mr. Sorensen or Mr. Fox. Absolutely. These are public servants, and we trust them. We count on them. And when that is breached, fortunately it's not too often in this county, but when it is breached, mine is, if we can prove it, we've got no room for leniency on those.
Now, one of the arguments, because you watch some of these videos, and a lot of times they look horrendous. Sometimes you don't see what led up to them. Sometimes you don't see what else might be going on. It's hard to justify some of the behavior, but nonetheless, it may be one of the hardest jobs in the world to be a police officer. They don't get any sort of special consideration because of the circumstances under which they're pursuing these things? No,
we can't. We can't. It's actually, I know Mr. Sorensen used to tell me we need to hold our law enforcement to even a higher standard because we want them to be the best, and we want them to know we want them to be the best. We're giving them power of use of force that nobody else has, and hence they have to do it. And fortunately, again, like Carlos does with his team, he expects and holds them to that standard. And whenever we have had an occasion in this county to prosecute a law enforcement officer, I get nothing but support both from the chiefs, the sheriff, and the peace officer associations and the deputy association. They don't want bad apples. So I think we have a high standard in this county.
So there's been pretty dramatic reforms under Governor Jerry Brown. We touched on realignment, Prop 47, and those kinds of shifts of maybe responsibility to the county level. One of the issues that the legislature is going to be dealing with is bail reform and looking at the economic circumstances of those accused and taking that into account. What is your view of this conversation around bail reform, some of the reform proposals that you've seen? What is your take on that for folks who are dealing with this on the front line? There's the philosophical conversation, and then there's how this actually would apply in our county. So let's start with you, Steve.
Yeah, I've taken the position very firmly that is in accord with the Chief Justice Commission that said, I support no more money bail. I would eliminate money bail altogether. And the basis for that is that in today's world, there's a million reasons why it's there, but particularly in our county, I can't tell you how many people. Everybody knows about the woman we've charged with a crime who's out on $64 million bail. We know, but we've got people who are out on $1,500,000 bail, and I think that's unfair. I think we ought to do it very simply. You do assessment, you gauge whether they're safe to release or not safe to release, and we do preventative detention if appropriate, and otherwise you simply put them out with conditions. And so I think the money bail system has ceased to achieve a level that serves our community, and I know there's a lot of issues, you know that better than anybody, but from my position is I think money bail has led to an inequity. I do not think that the way to deal with it is to simply say, well, because the rich people get out, we're going to let all the lower people who don't have the same money out. Mine is purely public safety, and that's why I would give to our judges the discretion to decide, do we need to detain this person or do we not?
Now, the historic standard has been, are they a flight risk? And there's a secondary standard of, are they a threat to somebody, should they be released? But that's indeed a secondary consideration. What would the standard be for you? Because you keep saying public safety. Sounds like you want to elevate the idea of whether or not they're going to reoffend or threaten a witness or anything like that.
I want it to be equal. Absolutely equal with the first prong of that, likelihood of return. Those are the two factors, public safety, likelihood of return. And this isn't new to us. In our juvenile system, since it existed, there's no money bail in juvenile. They've done this already where they do simply an assessment. Is the person likely to show up and what's their danger level? And they have loads of conditions. So we're not reinventing a system. We're just extending it on a far wider basis. And that's what I hope comes out of the legislation that's being worked on now, is that we can get there. I know money bail's still in the legislation as it exists now, but I'm hoping that the primary factor can look at these two things equal.
We're running short of time. I want to jump into the question of school safety. I don't know a school kid who hasn't had to have a school safety drill in their lifetime. They grow up, much as many of us did, under the threat of nuclear annihilation, of somebody walking on their campus and shooting the place up. Carlos, how do we make sure that schools are not only safe but feel safe?
Well, it's an unfortunate world now where our children live in. The positive thing is the possibility of an event like that ever occurring in a school is very, very, very remote. Nevertheless, we're dealing with our most precious children, and that fear exists in the parents. And we're very fortunate in San Mateo County that we worked with the San Mateo County Office of Education, all of law enforcement, all the schools to develop the Big Five, a standardized language where we know, depending on what the situation is, how we're going to respond to it. Additionally, law enforcement has been training since Columbine how to respond to these events more efficiently, more effectively, more rapidly, to immediately address the threat and neutralize it.
Okay. Steve, we've only got about 30 seconds left. Should we be changing our gun laws? Are they too easy? Is it too easy to get a weapon?
My belief is that we need to have greater controls. I'm a big supporter of controls. It can work. People can still have their guns, but we've got to do something. We cannot allow what's occurred down in Florida and other states to occur here, and I am a big supporter of that type of gun control.
We're out of time. We're going to have you back again soon. Sheriff Carlos Bolanos, District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe, thank you both for being with us. I'm Mark Simon.
And I'm Kevin Mullen.
And thank you for being with us. Join us next time on The Game.